type of society he's describing in the first paragraph? Ramos, what kind of society is he describing?
He described like the U.S. as the wealthiest country in the world.
Wealthy. Okay?
The only one with the atomic bomb.
Cool. Let me stop you there. We're wealthy. We're atomic bomb holding. Cool. What other words can we attach to this society he's describing in the first paragraph? Good. Freedom. Yeah. Happy. Right? Aren't there happy tones in there? Good.
Equality.
Happy. Right? They seem like equality. Cool. Josh, what else? Democracy. Yeah, they're spreading Western values. There's this belief that, like, as the founding charter member of the UN, like, soon the whole world's going to look like the U.S. and it's going to be a beautiful world and life's going to be good. Good. Complacent. What's another C word we can use? Yes, conformity. Comfortable. All of this together, so let's try to attach one word to this. It's an S word I'm looking for. That all of society that he's looking at the beginning of this youth movement. It's an S word, if that helps. Or even another word that's not an S word. You can say that too, and you can see maybe it's a synonym for my S word. What else? How else would you summarize more S words? See? Summarize, synonym. How would you cap all this together? Forget the S word part. Obviously it's not working. What do you got?
I said superior.
Superior? That's fine. You're right. It is an S word. Yes, France is a country. Yeah.
Would one be like a utopian society?
Utopian society in a sense, yeah, like a perfect, happy society. Good. Absolutely. Ross, what do you think? Yeah, a characteristic that kind of shares all this stuff. Serenity. Ooh, that's a good S word as well. I like that. I'll put that up in the word. Serenity, utopia. I like the utopia word as well. Anybody else? Good. Stable. Another good S word. It's not the S word. So all of a sudden I take away the S requirement, now you all have the good S words? Shit. That's my S word. I'm looking for something else though. Stupidity, huh? That's most American societies. Satisfied.
Where are we?
Satisfied. That America, the generation he's commenting on, is complacent. They are conformist. They are satisfied. They are happy. They are comfortable. And he says the two things that shatter all of this, at least in the young people's minds, are what? Rodas, give me the first one. The two events that really shatter all of this for the young people. Racism in the South. Now, question for you. Is this a new problem in the South?
No.
No. What's new about it? Activism. The fact that they're watching it on TV every night. The degradation, the degrading of humans with fire hoses and dogs and bombs. That really wakes up this new generation of youth, giving us the civil rights movement. What's the other event, Diana?
The Cold War.
The Cold War. This fear that maybe we're all going to die tonight. Not some of us, not many of us, not most of us. Oh, we're all dying. The Russians are coming, Terry. But thank God you're at your wheelchair, because now maybe you can get away. Now, so what parts of the Cold War are we most angry about?
The Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War. Abso-freaking-lutely. The Vietnam War, the arms race, and feared. So it's important that we look at, like, what decade is he describing here? What decade in which America is all wealthy and free and happy and complacent?
50s.
Yeah, the 50s, post-World War II, the late 40s, early 50s, when life is good and charmed and utopian and suburbia. And did all these problems exist? Yes, but we're going to ignore them because we're lacking in activism. And this is when the 60s become the 60s, is when the students get involved, start challenging authority, questioning the status quo, fighting against the power that is, and pushing for change. Now this is a very famous document called the Port Huron Statement. It is the founding of what's going to be called the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS. This is, in a sense, their Declaration of Independence. This is their preamble to what they want in society. They want change. They want free speech on college campus. They want women's rights. They want black rights. They want brown rights. They want rights. Okay, gay rights. And it all really begins, if you're talking about a domino effect, there is no domino effect of Cold War. Like, oh my God, if we lose this country, they're all going to fall. That doesn't happen. But the domino effect in the 60s and 70s really does happen of people questioning authority. It starts with civil rights, and then student rights, and then the right to not get drafted and not fight in a war you don't want to fight in, and then women's rights, and then Chicano rights, and then American Indian rights, and gay rights. Because, like every other time we've looked at it in society, when you start giving people a little bit of a taste of rights, they're never satisfied. More, as they should be. As they should be. So, it's important to understand, like, this is the 1950s, this is the 1960s, and this Port Huron Statement from the Students for a Democratic Society, super important in understanding why these students are so pissed, what they're pissed about, what they want in society, and how they want things to change. Right? All for 2 short paragraphs. Not bad, guys. Not too bad. Now, updates. I hope you guys all had a really nice spring break. I do. I know Rodas was mad about the homework. I'm sorry, Rodas. I apologize. I was mad too. I wouldn't give you guys 4 things to do, except you guys had 12 days off. It's the world's longest spring break I've ever heard of in my life. All right, I hope you guys got your stuff done, relaxed, slept in a little bit, played Fortnite. Freaking weirdo. What happened, George? Exactly. Remember, what's your opinion? It doesn't matter. It does not matter. Now, just to give you guys an update on what's happening, where we're going. Thursday, I will do a brief finishing lecture on the 1980s and Reagan and the end of the Cold War and the war on drugs and Reaganomics and all kinds of shadiness there that you guys read about. So that will happen on Thursday in the first 45 minutes. You're going to take your last test. Your last test until the one that actually matters. So your test will be about 37 multiple choice questions and 1 or 2 short answers. I haven't quite decided yet. So it's a short test. It's an easy test. It doesn't go too deep into anything. It's already the multiple choice is already written and done. And then you guys are done. You are officially done with content by 11:25 on Thursday morning. Not that bad. I tallied up the numbers last Friday when I was at school and you guys were off. And you guys, I couldn't figure out the exact number because we bounced around from book to book to book. But you guys read about 1,150 pages of college level textbook. Some of you. 1,150 pages of college level textbook. And I'm going to guarantee you that the chapter you read over spring break took you 1/10 as long as the chapters you guys read in August and September. It's funny how that works. All right, you guys don't often realize how far you've come until you look back and we're like, oh my God. All right, go back and look at some of the first essays you've written. And then look at what I just passed back. Actually, don't look at the one I just passed back. So you guys should be very proud of yourselves. You really, really should. I'm excited for review. Review's my favorite because it's our chance to either remember what we already learned or refill in some dots that I might have missed along the way. But I always budget as much time as possible for review. It's one of the reasons we go so fast, so that we can make sure that by May 11th you guys sit down and you're confident. You're like, I didn't just finish covering the Cold War last night and the test is today. Oh my God, it's worth it. Having the time to review is nice. There won't be very much homework during review time. It's more like preparing for what we're going to review in class. The only thing you'll read is out of the review book that you guys all love so much because it's so brief and right to the point and short and easy. So review is really driven on like more collaboration, more laid back, more push for like collectively getting ourselves where we need to go. I have some fun games planned. I showed you guys that we're here on Tuesday for the boot camp, the bracket, the debate argument about who's the most important people in American history. That'll be fun. I was talking about some Jeopardy. If that's you guys like playing games like that help you guys get engaged, that's fine. I enjoy a review because it's a chance to remember how much you guys already learned and also make sure that by May 11th we're really, really confident. Cool? So the only reason I thought about moving the test to Monday once I found out about the ACT getting moved, I really thought about it for about 6 seconds. I want to test Thursday because I just want to get you guys done with. I just want to get it done. You guys will be prepared for the test. It's not a hard test, I promise. It's right to the point on the civil rights movement, the Cold War, Vietnam, the stuff that you guys need to know from period 8. There's even a question about your idol, Reagan, even though God says you shall have no idol before me. I can quote the Bible at you. What's up? So the Winchell Bible says you shall have no idol before me. But here we are. What?
Who's you?
This guy. Better than Ronald Reagan. And that way on Monday we can get our review started with some like fun gamey type stuff. And then we can get into the period specific reviews in order after that. Any questions or comments? I hope the spring break homework was productive. Those one-pagers are always good. The one-pagers are as good as you make them. They're as useful and as productive and as meaningful as you're going to make them. That's on you guys. The 2 chapters were just assigned to make sure that we're done with textbook reading. I'm never going to give you the textbook chapter in your lives. Think of all those pages I've thrown onto your desk. Just all the trees. They were already dead, and I didn't kill the trees. Right? There's just the papers right here. All those textbook chapters that you've read or not read since the beginning of time, they're all done. We're done. And now it's time just to review and practice and gear up and get ready for a chance to save, $5, $6, $10, $12,000 on your college tuition. So it matters. We have 38 days from today, which is ideal. It's perfect. But of course, things come up like the ACT, like this, like that. All these things come up in the way. So I have to get it done as fast as possible so we have time for this. Cool? George agrees. Anybody doing anything fun on spring break?
No.
You came here. That was fun, wasn't it? That was a good boot camp. It was. I appreciate it. Cool. So let us then begin. Today we will talk. I'll circle back to the counterculture of the 60s because I wasn't here to teach you that last week, and I'll make sure it gets done. And the response to liberalism. The conservatism and chaos of the 70s. The 70s are arguably one of America's ugliest decades. They really are. Right? Ugly presidents. Nixon's a terrible-looking man. Ugly politics, ugly foreign policy. A lot of ugly stuff happens, which is one of the reasons we end up with a Reagan in 1980, and then the chaos that comes from that. Here's your prompt. How much do domestic and foreign policies change in the 70s? I urge you guys, as long as you can rephrase these prompts into your own words, they're way easier to write. How much do policies change? A lot. Outline is here. We'll just clean up the new left that we just talked about and these protest movements. We'll clean those up on our way out. We'll talk about the end of liberalism, why liberalism ends at the end of the 60s, Nixon's policies, Ford's policies, Carter's policies, and then at the very tail end, just the legacies of the 60s and 70s. Keep in mind that this is where College Board ends period 8. This is it. So the hour, give or take, you're getting on Thursday is just the need to knows from period 9. Period 9, like period 1, only accounts for 5% of the test. So that's why I give it 5% of my attention, because it only counts for 5%. So go from there. So I'm noticing some of you guys are confused on the terminology of liberalism versus conservatism. So I thought I'd take a second and just really define what we're talking about here. This is the textbook political science definition of what liberalism is. It's a nice place to start for today. It's the political doctrine, or the political belief, or the political ideology that says the government's problem, the government's job, the government's issue, their only sole responsibility is to protect the rights of the individual. The government should exist to protect your rights, and your rights, and your rights, and your rights, and maybe even Adrian's rights. Maybe. We'll see. The government is necessary. The government exists. The government should be as big and as powerful and as strong as possible to protect individuals from being harmed or discriminated against or hurt by others. The government is there to protect individual rights. Big government to make sure everybody has their rights. But liberalism also recognizes that sometimes government itself can pose a threat to that liberty. Espionage Act, Japanese internment, the Vietnam War, a threat to the liberty of individuals. So the government should be there to protect our liberty, but sometimes the government takes away our liberties as well. But the goal of government is to protect our rights. Now, question for you, just big general question. Is this a big or a small type of government? What do you guys think? Big, why?
Because they're expanding their authority to protect citizens.
1000%. Big government. To include rights for everybody, the social programs, and all of these things that are liberalism based. So what I'm going to have you guys do is take a minute and talk about other times in American history that our government has really pursued a very liberalistic approach. There's a couple good, easy opportunities to pick up and get your head around what liberalism looks like in practice from all the things you've learned this year. Minute 30, chat out with your partner. What are some other examples of liberalism? Go.
LBJ's Great Society Welfare Program,
Great example. That's arguably the best example. What?
like kind of what they said the New Deal.
Yeah, she's going to game. Yeah. When else do we see liberalism? The government being big and growing to protect people's rights.
But does he want us to identify them? Yeah. So there's that.
25 seconds. Get some other examples of liberalism down. It helps.
Well, I thought the fair deal. That's what the fair deal is. Well, talking specifically.
5, 4,
Yeah,
3,
the fair deal and the
2,
kind of
and 1.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear from Val. I heard something from you. What you got? Other examples of the government growing to protect people's rights.
I said FDR's presidency.
1000%. FDR's, what's it called? No. We got to stop getting our Roosevelt's mixed up.
Yeah. The New Deal.
New Deal, good. The New Deal is a huge, maybe the biggest example of liberalism in American history, of the government growing to protect people's rights. Fantastic example. Ventura, give me something else.
LBJ's Great Society.
Thank you. LBJ's Great Society is arguably the second biggest example of liberalism, of government growing, war on poverty. Within the Great Society's civil rights movement. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medi-Cal, Head Start. Absolutely. Great Society. Huge liberalism. Carla, what else? The Progressive Era. Yes! Starting with Teddy's Square Deal. Teddy's Square Deal, controlling corporations, consumer protection, conserving the environment. The 16th and 17th and 18th and 19th Amendments, protecting people's rights. The government growing in the Progressive Era. Abso-freaking-lutely. There's one other really good example as well. Anybody have any guesses? Really good, easy example of the government growing people's rights. I'll take any guess you got. I don't care who you are. It's funny, this is when you guys' papers get so fascinating. Oh my gosh. My desk looks so good. Is that a good eraser? Nope, just pencil. What do you think? Warren's Court, absolutely. Huge example. That's like kind of during the Great Society.
Yeah.
So Warren Court, phenomenal example. But keep in mind that the Supreme Court doesn't create laws. They just interpret laws. So they're just reinforcing liberalism with their political views. So yes, that works though. Good job. Come on, guys. This is an easy one. Josh, what do you think?
The Constitution.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not going to argue with that. Bill of Rights, sure. Bill of Rights is all an example of extending rights. What do you think?
The fair deal.
Fair deal? More of a continuation of the New Deal, right? Reconstruction. Passing new amendments and new agencies and new this and new that to protect African Americans. That was the first one first period said. Here you guys are, just shit in the bed. It's okay, it's a long time ago. Yeah, Reconstruction. Freedmen's Bureau. 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. Giving rights to new individuals that we now look at as citizens. Huge example. Abso-freaking-lute. Cool? Those are all examples of liberalism. But as we look at the scope and sequence and pendulum of American history, after each era of liberalism, we revert back to conservatism. Some would say regress. If you have a liberal viewpoint, you would say we regress back to conservatism. I would tend to agree, but I'm not here to put my political views on you. Let's talk about Reconstruction. Reconstruction is a huge push left, more liberalism. What happens after Reconstruction? Jim Crow South, segregation, racism returns in full force, fully authorized by the government, Plessy versus Ferguson, etc. What? The progressive era ends in 1919, contrary to many of your essays that point out FDR as a progressive president. Yes, he's progressive, he's not into progressive. The progressives end with the 19th Amendment, 1919. What happens next? The 1920s. The 3 Republican presidents. Laissez-faire, pro-business.
High tariff.
Yeah, high tariff, not pushing for citizens' rights. 1920s. The New Deal, pushing for all this progress and change. What happens after the New Deal? The conformity of the 1950s.
Suburbia.
Yeah, conformity, suburbia, everyone's back to their homes. And then the 1960s, this push for civil rights and progress and students' rights and protest. What happens next? The super conservatism of the 70s and 80s. So in each time of liberalism, the response helps you guys start your reviewing process. Every time we make what progressives would see as progress, conservatism comes back to the way. And that's American history forever. You swing left, you swing back right. You swing left, you swing back right every single time throughout American history. The 60s are no different. So one impact of the 60s is this rise of the new left, the new liberal. Youth movements, minority movements, pushing for liberalism. Pushing anti-militarism, anti-Cold War, anti-Vietnam, pro-opportunities for poor people, pro-minorities, pro-youth. And how are they going to push? What's their big method of pushing? Their agenda. What do they do so we know who they are? I heard it. How do they make their voices heard? Protest. Yeah. They are loud. They are a loud group. Like progressivism almost always is. But by the early 1970s, these new movements had created such chaos in society that what's going to become known as the silent majority pushes back. Nixon's silent majority. He's saying like we don't need to be loud, we just vote. I don't go out there protesting. I want my traditional, conservative, rural, white, Christian American values. When they say traditional American values, that's what these people mean. And they're pushing back. Want to return to conservatism. Return to the status quo. Return to middle-class, mainstream, normal America. Believing that the youth movements, all these crazy kids, smoking their dope and protesting, not getting haircuts, are destroying traditional American values. Traditional American values of Christianity, conservatism, marriage between a man and a woman over the Bible, having 2 kids, and wearing our aprons. We cook our macaroni and cheese. America. That's the America I stand for. Now, and that's the return. The 60s to the 70s as always. But let's go back in time. Warren G. Harding runs for president in 1920. What is his campaign slogan? Return to normalcy. Rutherford B. Hayes gets elected president in 1876. What does he promise to do? Get rid of the troops in the South. End Reconstruction. So every time we have our liberalistic push, there's always a conservative wave that comes afterwards. Every time. We have our first black presidents that pushes for affordable health care for everybody and gay rights. And what do we get next? Donald Trump. Every time there's a wave of liberalism, the return to conformity always sucks more. Now, a lot of this is defined by what's happening in urban cities as the protest movements get more violent and more destructive. We see in Los Angeles in 1965, in the neighborhood of Watts, which is not far from here at all, a huge riot. How does it start? Perceived police brutality. Continuity. African Americans are upset with the way they're being treated in their communities. They begin a riot that lasts for days and days to the level of weeks. 34 rioters are dead, over 1,000 are injured. Millions upon millions of dollars is damaged and done to the community. The National Street. Here's a picture from Life magazine from the cover. 2 years later, Detroit has a similar problem. And this one's even worse. In this case, Lyndon Baines Johnson calls out the National Guard, our domestic army in a sense. Very Washington and Hamilton whiskey rebellion-esque. Sends the National Guard, sends federal troops. We see tanks in American cities, in Detroit, to put down a rebellion, to put down a riot. In this case, 43 rioters are dead. Again, over 1,000 are injured. And this is demonstrating the fact that the civil rights movement has not created a utopian society that people think it might have. What are they writing? What are they writing for? What are they writing against? Anybody? What? Equality? Sure. Agreed. But the reaction in society is one of, oh my God, they're so ungrateful. We gave them the Civil Rights Act of 65. We gave them the Voting Rights Act. Why aren't they being more grateful? Because it never really was just about civil rights or voting rights. It's about human rights. But how do you legislate human rights? Yeah, but it's a struggle. LBJ creates the Kerner Commission, which is a group looking at why these riots keep happening. And the answer is it's not about voting rights or political rights. It's about frustration. That urban black people are impoverished, are in poverty, and they are stuck there because of white racism. And to a large extent, that's accurate. 1920s, we see a bunch of people leaving the cities. Who can leave the cities? Middle-class white people who can afford it. 1950s is the final cherry on top of that cupcake of suburban America. White flight, white flight, white flight, leaving behind urban decay. But even the suburban new households that are so nice, they're great, but black people aren't buying them, they're staying in the cities. So what we have is a fully accidentally, or not by law, but by practice, segregated society. And the answer is to improve interracial communications, to improve the way in which the races come together. But yet here we are in 2018 having many of the same riots in the same types of places over the same issues 50 years later. Johnson tells former CIA director at the time that, in his words, these groups, the problem is, in Johnson's mind, the groups have nothing to live for. He says 40% of them are unemployed, which is mind-numbing. These youngsters, they live with rats, they've got no place to sleep, broken homes, illegitimate families, all the narcotics circling around them, and we have isolated them because they're all in one area, and when they move in, we move out. So he's blaming a lot of things. He's blaming the fact that they're broken homes, they're illegitimate families, they're not married, they're just having a bunch of kids, there's drugs everywhere. And he's saying that when African American people move to an area, the white people leave. Is he wrong? Is he wrong in 2018 America? Not necessarily. Is he wrong in 1965, 1967 America? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So a lot, and I want to show you guys why a lot of this protest movement ends with conservatism, because of this belief that it's us against them. We gave them the right to blank. Why are they still angry? Why do they want more? They're ungrateful. But the big push, the big focus of the protest movement is in fact the Vietnam War. Most of the Vietnam protest is led by white, middle and upper class college students who got out of the war. Which is funny, because they're the ones that didn't have to go fight, and they're the ones that are protesting on behalf of their generation. Makes me happy. Students are protesting the draft, the fact that kids should have to go without having a chance to volunteer, being chosen for a war they see as immoral. They're protesting the use of the military to research on college campuses, using all those science labs to figure out bombs, not cures to cancer. And the fact that the majority of soldiers in Vietnam are black, Hispanic, or white and poor. So poor white, black, or Hispanic. Now, why would those be the soldiers that are in Vietnam? Why? Why are those ones that are in Vietnam? Go ahead.
Because they didn't have money to go to school.
There it is. They didn't have money to go to school. They couldn't pay off a doctor to tell them they had bone spurs. President Trump. They couldn't get out of the draft. So those are largely the numbers that are in the draft. Absolutely. They can't afford college, so they're eligible for the draft, and they have to go to Vietnam. What?
Oh, no.
So that makes this, like I told you guys last week, a rich man's war, a poor man's fight. As the fighting intensifies in Vietnam, 65, 66, 67, 68, the protests get stronger as well. Now this protest movement, however, inspires other groups to do the same thing. Two groups worth focusing on are the Native American protest movement and the Hispanic American protest movement as well. In 1961, the Native Americans create their equivalent of the Declaration of Independence, criticizing policies that have been churning them for the last, 360 years. Lobbying, asking for inclusion in societies of war and poverty. A lot of the programs have left them behind, New Deal included. And Johnson even creates the National Council on Indian Opportunity in 1965, giving Native Americans a voice in the government, which is the first time they're being included in the process as opposed to reservationized. But up to this point, all the talk we've had about Native Americans is Indian wars on the frontier, Battle of Little Bighorn, right? The end of the Indian Wars, closing of the frontier, the Dawes Act, reservation policy, Jackson's Indian removal. So now, finally, they're trying to, society is attempting to include them in the process. In 1968, the Native American protest gets a little more aggressive, much like most protests in 1968, with what's called the Red Power movement. It's a younger movement based on the Black Power movement, largely of Malcolm X and the more extremist African-American push for civil rights. And they really begin their movement by establishing an event to mock Columbus Day, which is quite logical if you're a Native American, to mock Columbus Day. In California, in Los Angeles specifically, what is Columbus Day now called? Yep, Indigenous Peoples Day. They'd be very happy about that. Creating the American Indian Movement, the AIM, which is the most militant, most aggressive, most violent of their movements. They take over the island of Alcatraz, the old prison on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco. Anybody ever been there or seen it? Yes? It's kind of a cool place. Creepy, isn't it? Yep. And they take over Alcatraz and they take over the whole island for 19 months, which is a long time, asking for their rights. Their goal is to protect their own old Native American way of life. They want to reassert Native American culture. They don't want to assimilate into white culture. They want to have their own society separate from white America. But it's important we note the beginnings of real Native American protest movement as stemming from the 60s as well. Hispanic Americans also, by the 60s, are the fastest growing minority in America. And they are looked at as a much more impatient minority. They look at African Americans and they say, I don't want this progress to take 400 years like it's taken everybody else. We want our rights. We're here. We want them now. Much of their early protest is driven by Cesar Chavez and La Casa, pushing for rights of migrant workers, rights of Hispanic American agriculture workers, largely in places like California's Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, where, if any of you guys have driven up the 5 freeway all the way to San Francisco, some of those college trips, it's where a lot of this takes place. And a lot of Cesar Chavez's work comes on behalf of farm workers. A lot of it is inspired by the nonviolence of the civil rights movement of MLK and the civil rights movement, pushing to use protests and nonviolence to get attention, and with attention comes change. I was talking to my mom the other day, and somehow this randomly came up. She mentioned something, and I was like, oh, cool, Mom, I'm going to teach that on a Tuesday. And she said, oh, tell your kids, when she was a kid, they weren't allowed to buy green grapes for like a month. My mom was 7 or 8, she remembers, but she was in elementary school. And she said, I loved green grapes, and we weren't allowed to buy green grapes, and I didn't know at the time, but it's because Cesar Chavez, they had asked people to boycott green grapes, to come to the aid of those workers that are picking the grapes, because if people can't sell their grapes, then it's the workers who then get attention to their problems. So my mom remembers as an 8-year-old, her mom telling her, like, no, sorry, we have to support Cesar Chavez. My mom's like, I don't care who we're supporting, I'm 8 and I want green grapes. But now she's 58 and still remembers as a kid supporting Cesar Chavez by not eating green grapes. And that really stuck with her. So that's the way in which the Cesar Chavez of the world pushed for Hispanic American workers' rights. Now, a lot of their asks are very similar to Gilded Age unions. We want better working conditions. We want less hours. We want more money. Eventually, we have a much more militant Chicano and Chicana movement that's more centered not in agricultural work, but in urban areas. For example, the East LA school walkout, which takes days and days and days in the 1960s, which is much more militant. But they're boycotting schools, boycotting businesses to try to get more Hispanic American, Chicano American classes, teachers, administrators, people in society, more opportunities for Mexican Americans. Here's Cesar Chavez on the cover of Time magazine, and there it is, The Grapes of Wrath, Mexican Americans on the March. So my mom was 9, she was born in 1960. So even better. That was the one thing they used as their push. It was during grape season, and a lot of the bigger growers in the San Joaquin Valley up the 5 freeway are huge growers of green grapes. So that was the one they used as they can't ask people to just stop buying vegetables, because that's unrealistic. But by asking people to stop buying green grapes made a huge impact. So I found it eye-opening. I'd never heard that story until this weekend. Mom was like, oh yeah, I was 8 or 9, I couldn't have green grapes. For like 3 weeks, it was terrible, but now I understand why my mom was like, so it's isn't cool. So very important that these both come off of the protest movements of the 1960s. I'm going to have you guys turn your page and read a brief excerpt from a woman working on the cause, La Casa, with Cesar Chavez. I'll have you read it and answer the question. And tell me what about this, in terms of social change, societal change, how does this piece demonstrate continuity, and what about this piece demonstrates change? I'll give you guys about 4 minutes. Read it, answer, then we'll go from there. Go. Minute 30 left. What about this demonstrates continuity in social change? Change in social change. All right, to wrap up your thoughts. What about this experience demonstrates continuity or continuing more of the same in regards to social change? Margaret, take a shot at it.
Oh,
Oh, I was looking. I'm sorry.
there was a continuity remained of women being seen as lower.
Yeah.
But then eventually, as time progressed, she got a say.
Good. So that's a continuity and a change, right? That women being looked at as marginalized in their push for change. Absolutely.
I felt like it was a continuity because every time men need women to do the work, they'll bring them in. Like when they need them, so like when men went to war, they needed women to do the work.
That when it's convenient,
Yeah.
then women are included. Like you used war as an example. What's another movement in which women are brought in because they're needed? There's two. Yes, work-wise, absolute market revolution. Yes. I wasn't even thinking about that one. That's a good one, though.
There's one where like they were fighting for a certain cause, but it was only for men, but women were still helping them.
Abolition. Abolition of slavery, right? When there's it's African American people are looking at abolition and women are involved, and then once we abolish slavery, we're like, what about women's rights? Yeah, good. So abolition and the progressive era. Some of our most famous muckraking journalists are Ida Wells, Ida Tarbell, Jane Addams. Women being involved in social change from the written perspective.
I had a continuity,
Please break it down.
but I don't know if it's right.
And if it's not, then we all die. So hopefully you're right. Our lives are all in your hand.
I said that it shows continuity because there are so many like immigrant workers doing like field work, and then the change is that like socially men are letting women take charge because it benefits everybody. When in the past they're like really hard-headed and they just want to do everything themselves.
Good. That's a great continuity and a change. There's one more clear continuity here as well in terms of how societal change usually happens. What is it? No, whoever. I mean, if you want to answer, you're welcome to. What's the other clear continuity in terms of how people get change? Want this? What do you think? Power in. Josh, what do you think? Numbers. In this case, what's the word? What? What's the word for power in numbers that she uses? We've also used in other times of societal change in American history. Unions. Yeah. Like using the fact that there's more of us than them, that if we all come together and unite, then we can change. Yeah, so now here we see the Hispanic American movement pushing with agricultural unions to try to fix their situation in society. Good. Another huge push in the 1960s into the 70s is for pink power. women's liberation. It showed some really clear successes and some really terrible shortcomings. Now, feminism in the 60s really begins with a woman named Betty Friedan. Very, very, very important name. In terms of women, not just women, but humans that are journalists that have a huge role in American society. Thomas Paine, Common Sense. Right? Betty Friedan, The Feminine Mystique. Betty Friedan in 1960 publishes The Feminine Mystique, and she is simply a dissatisfied housewife who is sad about the fact that her life is simple, unfulfilling, boring, and plain. And she says, for all of these housewives, there's got to be more out there. The problem then is a lot, and this is on your test, a lot of the focus for the women's rights movement centers on those housewives and kind of neglects the lower class working women that are already like really struggling in other parts of society. She wants equality for all women and uses the fame that comes from her book to start the National Organization of Women. NOW, N-O-W. The National Organization of Women, which is trying to protest unequal pay, unequal treatment, discrimination in the workplace. And their big demand is an Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, which they want to have amended, added to the Constitution, like every other amendment, which would ban sexism and sexual discrimination. And their argument is, one of their arguments, if African Americans can have their Equal Rights Amendment, why can't women? Nice little review chance for you. What is the African American Equal Rights Amendment? 14th. Good. Because 13th is abolition. 14th is citizenship. And 15th is voting. 13th is voting rights. Good. So they're looking at saying, like, well, if we have one that says African Americans are equally protected under the law, then why shouldn't women have the same thing for sexual discrimination? Unfortunately, this amendment is not ratified. It is defeated by one group that you should expect, conservatives in Congress and in the states, and the other group, which might surprise you, there's a conservative women that don't want an Equal Rights Amendment. Women that are saying, no, we don't need that. Our place is here in the home, happy. And they're led by a woman you should know named Phyllis Schlafly, who just sounds like a terrible human. Phyllis. Anybody named Phyllis? Nah, Lucian Baumstein wasn't Phyllis. Phyllis Schlafly. And so, unfortunately for women, the Equal Rights Amendment is never ratified. It's still up for ratification. It's never been ratified. Now, you want to talk about continuity? Let's look at my map. Not that one. This one. The green are all the states that ratified or approved the amendment. You need 2/3 of the states to approve a new amendment. The yellow are the states that did not approve the Women's Equal Rights Amendment. I'll just let you look at that for a minute. What was that, Vargas?
The South.
What a surprise, the South. That here we have the only exception being Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, the slave-holding states of the South. The states that seceded. The states that had to be reconstructed. So here we have a good continuity of the South, as always being the one that's more conservative, more pushing against social change. Women, however, do gain the right of abortion. In 1973, in a super important court case, Roe v. Wade, which allows women to have the choice of what to do with their own body in terms of reproduction. We have Title 12 passed to protect women from sexual harassment. Very important. So Congress is doing some actions to protect women's rights, specifically in the workplace. And Title 9 is still in the books today, which protects women from sexual discrimination in any educational program. So now women can't be discriminated against. So that's where we get women's sports, for example. Women's college sports are because of Title 9. Because what sports make money in college? Men's football, men's basketball. But a college has to spend the same amount of money on men's sports and women's sports to avoid discrimination. So then they're creating women's sports, even though they don't make money, because you don't have 10,000 people come to see a women's lacrosse game. They still have to be there because of Title IX. So these are both really important for women. That's important for women. This is important for women. That's super important for society and women. And that's just too bad that Phyllis Schlafly exists.
True.
So now what you're going to do is you're going to read a brief excerpt from Betty Friedan. It's really, really good, from her book, The Feminine Mystique. And a brief response by Phyllis Schlafly, The Power of the Positive Woman. I'm going to give you guys 5 to read them both. And just at the bottom for me, it says, compare the perspectives of both women regarding the women's rights movement. So read them both. They're both brief, right to the point. Read and respond. Go. There's a whole bunch of other ones that I'd love to talk about if they were specifically color-coded. The Filipino movement, there's also the Yellow Power movement for Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans. So it gets caught up in your reading. Three minutes. Ready to do well. About a minute left, guys. Talk to the person next to you for just a quick 30. Like, what stands out? What's different about these ladies' perspectives? Go.
So she's questioning kind of well, she is like saying how it's a woman's duty to take care of the child. It comes through naturally. So it's expected for men to be like philosophers and women to practice and
For Betty, she argues that women are limited and strictly entitled to the domestic ministry while giving a sense of dissatisfaction, whereas Phyllis opposes the women's liberation movement with her Stop ERA campaign because she believes that it's like said that women are responsible for nurturing their kids and providing for the husband.
All right.
And she shows that she's content.
Let me hear from Ms. Vargas. What is the big difference in their beliefs on women empowerment?
So Betty
Betty.
Betty Friedan.
That's fine. Betty Friedan. But it's fine. What I'm noticing, I know a lot of you guys is writing is you're like, that's only I'm stopping you there. Because a lot of you will put like, oh, there was the woman who criticized society for not giving women's rights. I'm like, that's cool. There was a woman that did that. Get more explicit, more specific. So yes, good job. Betty Friedan says
That she strongly thinks she believes that women should just stay at the house.
should or shouldn't?
Shouldn't.
Shouldn't. Okay, good. Good. And what does the other lady believe, Val? Go ahead. Oh yeah, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay, I was gonna say that Betty thinks that there's this like.
Betty. Help us remember, guys, because you can't just put Betty in your chest. Oh, Betty.
Yeah, she believes that. I'm gonna say it. She believes that like there is this underlying like feeling in every woman's daily life, like where at the end of the day she just thinks that is this it, or like do I want to do something else with my life? And sometimes maybe they're not content with just like being the perfect housewife. And then Phyllis Shafee, I said it right?
Nailed it.
Thanks. She believes that like it is a woman's duty and they should be like proud within themselves to like do what comes with like their daily routine, I guess. So,
Yeah.
like, they should feel satisfaction
In
in being a good housewife and mother.
and being a mother and housewife. Yeah. So the big push for women is like, we don't want to be, if we get an equal rights amendment, we're going to have to go work and we're going to have to be like men. And that's not what it's about. It's about society looking at you as an equal. Unfortunately, it gets put down, does not get ratified. But that line at the end, I saw a lot of you guys underlined it. Is this all? Asking yourself, she didn't ask, can't ask her husband, can't ask her neighbor, because she doesn't want to disturb the conformity of the neighborhood, the suburban neighborhood. Is this all? Is this it? Implying there's got to be something else more out there. Got to be something else more out there. Here's an example of women protesting the Miss America pageant. Welcome to the Miss America cattle auction. Criticizing Miss America for only treating women as marginalized sex objects. So it's important we understand the way women are pushing for progress, and while receiving some, they are denied that equal rights amendment. So in general, this is up here as a good summary slide for you guys to reference later if you'd like. For the 6 of you that actually look at my slides later. This is just the counterculture in general. It's driven by drugs, specifically marijuana, movies, music, revolts, the music revolution, Woodstock, Beatles mania. A lot of it feels a new sexual revolution as well, of extramarital or premarital sex. Oh my God. They're thinking that if it feels good, do it. That's the counterculture. Drugs feel good, do it. Sex feels good, do it. Do whatever the hell you want. Live the good life. The debate over the birth control pill is really categorized through the counterculture. But it's important that even before Roe v. Wade, before abortion is legalized nationwide, in 1970, approximately 1 in 3 fetuses is aborted. 1/3. That's nuts. I'm not telling you if I'm pro or against abortion. It's not the place. I'm for women doing whatever they need to do for themselves because they're women. I'm for saying 1 in 3 fetuses being aborted is a very high rate for society. But it demonstrates how much sex this young culture is having without fear for the repercussions. We see Playboy being published for the first time. Divorce rates increasing, probably because of Playboy. But more open marriages, more cohabitation, living with somebody that you aren't married to. Right? I lived with my wife for 4 years before we got married. We couldn't afford 2 rents, but, you know, a variety of other reasons. And also moving towards gay rights and gay liberation as well. And the gay rights movement, like every other social movement, is of course way more supported in cities than in rural areas. Another good continuity. Where do women have more rights? Cities. Where African Americans have more rights? And so on and so forth. A couple of things that make me sad, but it's important to note that in 1975, the American Psychiatric Association ruled for the first time that being gay was not a mental disorder. That it wasn't a mental disorder like schizophrenia or other developmental mental disorders. It was simply a way of life, a choice or born. They don't rule on that. But they finally ruled that it was not a disorder of the brain. And in 1975, not that long ago, my parents were 15. The U.S. Civil Service, that whole, those old patronage jobs, the bureaucracy, in 1975 ended a ban on gay employment. Is that funny?
No.
So just 40 years ago, the government finally stopped outlawing gay people from working in the U.S. government civil service. So a lot of progress with the counterculture, but with it a lot of tension. Now we look at 1968 as the year that the 60s died. And in 1968, we really see a splitting of the Democratic Party for a couple reasons. Reason one, LBJ chooses not to run again. He's tired of being president. He's tired of the protests and the anger, and the Vietnam War has killed his credibility and killed his popularity rating. And he decides in 1968, I'm not running for president again. The front runner for the Democratic nominee, Robert Kennedy, JFK's little brother, is shot and killed in California while running for president. So the 2 best Democratic candidates are, now one said I'm not running, the other one died. Leaving the Democrats with 2 options. The first is Eugene McCarthy. He is the senator from Minnesota. And he is the more progressive candidate. More progress. He's very idealistic. He has high ideals. He's anti-Vietnam. And he's very well supported by the counterculture, by the new left, by this progress side of the Democratic Party. Middle, upper class white people, college students, minorities. Anybody who's anti-Vietnam and pro-progress is pro-McCarthy. The other candidate is LBJ's vice president, Hubert Humphrey. He's more a Truman-style Cold Warrior, meaning very strongly anti-communism, not really worried about domestic progress, worried about defeating communism, defeating the Soviets, and therefore he's not really loved by the people, because the people are in the mood for progress and change in society moving forward. And he doesn't even really campaign for the position. He thinks he's a logical person to go next because he's been vice president. And Humphrey gets picked by the Democrats, leading to a huge angry, violent protest and a fight with police outside the convention center in Chicago where the Democratic convention happens. So the way I see it, anytime you have a huge fight at your own convention to pick your presidential candidate, chances are that guy's not going to get elected. Sure enough. We see the very famous signs, hell no, we won't go, for Vietnam. The belief is that if we elect Humphrey, then it'll just be more continuation of the same policies in Vietnam. End the war in Illinois, send the cops home. Blaming the cops for the violence, anti-protesting in Chicago. There are the streets outside the convention center, where, as you see, all the white helmets are clearly police and National Guard. And then a very famous picture that is published worldwide of policemen beating protesters that are protesting the nomination of Humphrey. So what does that show of the Democratic Party? The Democratic Party is split. That they're split over the issue of Vietnam and progress and society moving forward. And that, of course, allows for a Republican to get elected. That Republican is Richard Milhouse Nixon. This is a great middle name, Milhouse. Richard Milhouse Nixon. Republicans benefit from two things. One is the very unpopular Vietnam War, which is turning into a disaster by the minute. Two is the shattered Democratic Party. Nixon wins the election as kind of a middleman, a reconciler, a guy to kind of be in between both and to push forward that direction. But I want to call your attention to a couple things. One, Nixon wins a lot of votes. But two, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia all vote for George Wallace. Not just vote for him as the guy who wins the majority of votes in that state. You guys remember George Wallace? You saw a video of him saying segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. That guy just won 5 states. And 13, now almost 10 million votes. George Wallace. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Which opens up the idea that you can win a lot of votes in the South by simply campaigning on the idea of states' rights and anti-racial progress. That will become a thing going forward. We'll get to there in a second. So it's a very important election that reveals a lot about American society. And this, to me, is the most worrisome. The fact that those 5 states, despite the fact there's a Voting Rights Act and a Civil Rights Act, are so upset about the progress, they're going to vote for George Wallace. He'll run for president again in 4 years, and he'll get shot and killed. If ever there was a justified assassination. Now, there's Nixon with his win. That's his very trademark. He does the same thing when he resigns office.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I argue he looks like a white Lopez, right? So he wins. He wins a pretty convincing election. Life is good. And that's what gives us our final party system for now. And that Republicans are the conservative party of states' rights, no government spending, and this Southern strategy, appeal to white, upset Southerners, not on economic issues, on race issues. They are, in their words, the more Christian party, the more morally upstanding party, more pro-life, anti-abortion rights, anti-progress rights. And as you can see, they're going to be defined by like the Bible Belt, that whole little, like, what used to be the Black Cotton Belt, the Midwest, and the Rocky Mountains. The Democrats are more the party of liberalism, of progress, of push, of spending. Spend money for people's rights. High taxes, low taxes. Social programs, mind your own business programs. Big federal government, states' rights. National health insurance, affirmative action, fix the environment, pro-choice for women. And there's going to be the party of more professionals and academics, which is always the party you want to be in, where there's people that go to college. Women, youth, minorities, urban unions, and the Northeast and Pacific West, where we are here. So Nixon, getting into his presidency, his foreign policy is called détente. 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 His détente policy is threefold. There's 3 aspects to it. But détente simply means relaxing of tensions. We've had so much high tension for so long. All right, let's go back over here to my foreign policies. Marshall Plan, Truman Doctrine, the Berlin Airlift, the Korean War, brinksmanship, mutually assured destruction, Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam. We had really high tension for a long time. Nixon's goal is to lessen that tension. So don't have to worry about dying every minute, every day because of communism. Let's bring the tension down a little bit. With 3 things. 1, we're going to get out of Vietnam. That's what he tells us, at least. We'll get out of Vietnam. 2, we're going to use trade. We're not going to fight the Soviets. We're going to use trade to try to get them to cooperate with us. We don't need to be best friends, and if we could just cooperate in the world, we'll all be better off. And 3, we're going to get a little bit better with our relations with China. And he is quite successful here. He's the first president to visit communist China. We actually recognize, in terms of like foreign relations-wise, that communist China exists as a real country that we're going to have a relationship with. He goes to China with his wife. We get better relations, but that pisses off those guys, and they get more butthurt. So we have better relations with them. We finally get out of Vietnam under him. It takes a long time. And tension with the USSR does turn down for a little bit. Now his plan for Vietnam is called Vietnamization. To Vietnamize the Vietnam War. To let Vietnam fight their own war. However, I would argue that if they could fight their own war, they would have been fighting it all along. We wouldn't have to be there, and instead we were there. The thinking is that if we take away our troops gradually, by taking the training wheels off, then the Vietnamese can fight their own war, and we'll be out, and whatever happens, happens. Except we've been there now for like 15 years. Obviously, whatever's happened has been happening. And then this other they can fight their own war. However, this is his public policy. His private policy is a little bit more hawkish, or a little more aggressive. He orders an invasion of two countries, Cambodia and Laos, both in the Indochina Peninsula that are bordering South Vietnam. His argument is that will stop the flow of troops and supplies from North Vietnam. So the U.S. just goes and invades two more countries. Does he tell Congress? No. Does he tell the American people? No. We are bombing the living crap out of North Vietnam like we always have. But now we're bombing Cambodia and Laos, two countries that don't have anything to do formally with the actual conflict. Once this becomes known in public, the effect is the largest series of protests in American history, as the American students get even more and more and more upset over the fact that you promised us you were getting us out of the Vietnam War, and now we just went and invaded two more countries. You could argue that he's like, yeah, I did get our troops out of the U.S. I just got them into Cambodia and Laos. I told you I'd leave Vietnam. I did, to go invade somewhere else. It's fine. Makes it. Of course, all these bombings and invasions are conducted without the consent or the approval or the knowledge of Congress. Now, why was he able to do this stuff without Congress knowing? What allowed him to do this without Congress having to approve it? No, that's what's coming to take away that power.
Wasn't it when FDR got power from Congress for World War?
Not necessarily, but I see where you're going with that. There's a specific act of Congress that gave LBJ the power to do whatever the hell he wanted in Vietnam. Just only applied to Vietnam. Because remember, Congress has the power to declare war, but they kind of gave away that power during Vietnam. Remember? It's a big one. I came back last Wednesday. It was your last day before break. I wrote it on the board. I was like, this is the blank check they gave LBJ to fight.
Hey, I have the notes.
Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Yeah. So, I'm sorry. I'd wait for your notes if I could. But the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which allowed the president to do whatever he wanted in Vietnam, allows Nixon to do this without having to tell anybody. The two biggest protests are at Kent State and Jackson State, a white college and a black college. Both of which result in huge, bloody confrontations between students and the National Guard. So in 73, Congress passes, very important, should be your notes, the War Powers Act, which then takes away that president's power to do whatever the hell he wants. And it makes any president, for any conflict ever, get congressional approval to send troops anywhere more than 90 days. And tell Congress within 2 days, anywhere we get military involved, so that they can approve it or disapprove it. So it really then lessens those powers of what was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Good. Good. So it takes back that congressional power. Now, I was trying to point out the Kent State University protests. They're mad about the invasion of Cambodia from a president who promised to get us out of Vietnam. In this specific protest, the Ohio National Guard kills 4 students, wounds 9 other students. So 13 kids are demonstrating their right to protest. It's their First Amendment right, and they're killed for it. 4 of them killed, 9 of them hurt. Nixon's reply is like, well, maybe they shouldn't have protested. Most of the national opinion, the public opinion on the protest is it's the students' fault. To me, this one example really emphasizes the fact that Americans are over protests, they're over social change, just like we got over Reconstruction. We're like, oh, we've done too much, let's just go back to the way things were. Showing that really the turmoil in America is causing a ton of conflict between the youth-based counterculture and the rest of America. When 4 kids die approaching on college campus, a war that's really unpopular, and America's like, well, that shows a ton about public opinion. Here's a picture, a very famous picture of the student protest at Kent State. As you can see, it's very, the kids are armed with tanks and missile launchers. Oh, wait, no, they're not. They're just protesting with rocks, and, you know. This picture actually won the Pulitzer Prize for photography for what it demonstrates about the protest. Now, in general, Nixon is more successful with the rest of his world politics, not Vietnam. But eventually, by 1973, we have ended the Vietnam War. At least we've ended our part of it. By that, I mean we left. With the Paris Peace Accords, January 1973, the hostilities are ended. All that's agreed to is that they give us back our prisoners of war, and we give them back their prisoners of war, and then we're just out. So after fighting a war for, depending on how you want to start it, what dates? 1961, for fighting a war for 13 years, and we're just going to walk away. We're going to leave the South Vietnamese on their own. No more support, no more help. Sorry, we're out. The results, of course, 58,000 dead American soldiers, 300,000 wounded, $150 billion in costs. And the whole point at this, from Nixon says, let's put Vietnam behind us. Let's just move forward. But by that, you're ignoring and neglecting the fact that millions of people live in Vietnam that are just going to leave behind on their own. However, he does have, it should be in your notes as well, in 1972, he formally recognizes China as a power, as a country, and goes to visit. He establishes diplomatic relations with China. It's a big deal. And in 1972, we have our first treaty with the Soviets. It's called SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT I, which is going to limit how much nuclear testing and development of missiles we're going to do. So in both of these cases, good on you, Nixon. I'll give him credit where he deserves. Good on you, Nixon, for easing tension with China, for having a new treaty with the Soviet Union to try to get us closer, further away from atomic war. But the Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos aspect is kind of a black eye. So despite his public détente, his public easing of tensions, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens foreign policy-wise that is not known until much later. Under his presidency, the CIA is paying and supporting the leaders of 4 terrible governments: the Shah of Iran, South Africa, the Philippines, and Nicaragua. So we are propping up these governments because they are not communist. The CIA also assassinates the Chilean president under Nixon's watch because they're worried he might be turning Chile into a communist nation. So he promises this happy peace with the Soviets, with them as a country, but we're still fighting communism elsewhere. Iran specifically is going to blow up in our face in a minute, and the Philippines and Nicaragua. Also, as mentioned last Wednesday under his watch, are the Pentagon Papers, super, super important, which are leaked via the New York Times to show how shady the war in Vietnam was. He tries to get them from getting published, goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules in New York Times versus the U.S. that no, they can get published, which is a big win for freedom of the press. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So that's Nixon's foreign policy. A couple successes, I would argue more failures. And then we can hit a couple of his domestic actions, and then we'll go into Watergate. Cool. So the big thing for Nixon's domestic policy is, you can title it as New Federalism. He's going to return a bunch of power to the states, because that's the conservative Republican ideology. Let the states decide. So Nixon shifts responsibility for social problems, racism, poverty, all these things LBJ was trying to tackle with the national government. Nixon's going to return them to the states. Much more conservative approach. Also, during his presidency, which is not even that long, 4 Supreme Court justices retire, and he replaces all of them with very conservative justices, which is going to allow the Supreme Court, after the Warren Court, to be a much more conservative court afterwards, which is going to have a much longer-lasting legacy. Much longer-lasting legacy. So, yes, New Federalism is important. Everything passed that would support civil rights, he vetoes. Because that's a state decision. That's a state decision. He does, however, expand affirmative action. The government hires more minority workers, so they can't get sued for discrimination. That's good. I would argue the biggest domestic win of his presidency is very important still today. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is created to save our environment, which we are damaging at a very high rate. Also important, he helps create OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety Administrations, which is what labor unions have been asking for 100 years. Safe working conditions, regulations on what's safe at work. This is the same program that makes me watch the stupid video training every summer before the school year starts for what I do if someone starts bleeding in my classroom. Run. I'm kidding, that's not what I have to do. And unfortunately for him domestically as well, because we're OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in the Middle East, they embargo or they block off all oil to the U.S., leading to a huge problem and a mass energy crisis. So some success on the domestic front, more failure on the domestic front, and a lot of stepping back of civil rights progress under Nixon. Cool. So I'm having you read a short excerpt from a very, very influential book titled Silent Spring from Rachel Carson. This is the book that really gives us the Environmental Protection Agency, just like the jungle gave us the Pure Food and Drug Act. Exactly. So it's important that we understand how these books play a role in American society. There's another example of a muck-raking piece of journalism giving us progress. So take 4. Read it, please. Sure. And then answer for me, how does this piece of journalism demonstrate a continuity in American society? Go. All right, so let's break this down. What do we see as continuity? How is this continuing more of the same in American history? Let me hear from you, Terry. What about this is continuing previous trends?
Still foreign affairs.
Glad you read it. About the environment. Adrian. Yeah, it's a continuation of muckraking. How so? Regardless, it's a continuing of using journalism to expose, that's what we're looking for, right? Expose society's problems. Cool. Josh, how else is this continuing?
I was kind of going to say the same thing, but...
Just go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay, you're speaking heavily.
So like despite exposing it, it also helps push for legislations to like better the condition of society. So like for instance, with how the other half lives by like Jacob Freeze. It helped pass the New York Tenement Housing Act. So like in this case, it helped pass the EPA.
Yeah, to create the EPA. So and then also women. Women recognize the fact that they're not going to have a huge political role or an economic role, because that's what society has imposed on them, but finding other avenues to incite change. In this case, a huge quantity of women. Journalism. Women using journalism to push for change. Good. Good, good. All that's right. Cool. So in 1972, and bear with me guys, I know you're tired, it's the first day back, but we've got to finish this by today, just the way it works. Give me 20 more minutes of your life, and I'll give you back your time until Wednesday. Thursday. Thursday. 72, Nixon runs for re-election against a guy named George McGovern, who is labeled by Nixon as a supporter of acid, abortion, and amnesty. Nixon labels him as a supporter of drugs, supporter of free love and abortion, and a supporter of amnesty for undocumented immigrants. Here are in the 70s having the same debates as today. Nixon kills him, not actually, just figuratively in the election, with the fourth largest margin of victory in American history. The fourth largest. Look at that. I know. Good job, Massachusetts. Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. are the only two places that actually don't vote for Nixon, which is funny that D.C. doesn't, never mind. So, it looks right now like Nixon is one of the most popular presidents in America. Unfortunately, a short time later, he will be resigning his office and moving on with his life because of Watergate. Now, what's important here, though, is the first time we see a huge voting bloc for Republicans in the South since Reconstruction. This is that new Southern strategy of attracting white people who are pissed off about racial equality. White people who are anti-Voting Rights Act, anti-Civil Rights Act, anti-Fair Housing Act, anti-liberal Warren Court Supreme Court. The only way to get a more conservative in court is elect a more conservative president and then he'll pick conservative judges. This is this new Southern strategy of getting the white Southerners in the Republican Party. Super important. You know why this happens? LBJ. LBJ says, yeah, I lost the South for Democrats. But he said it was worth it. By passing the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, by pushing for that civil rights progress, LBJ said, the Democrats will not win the South for a long, long time. And in a sense, he's correct. That gives the Republicans in the South that ammunition to pull those angry white voters by saying, don't vote Democrat. Those are the guys that integrated your schools. Those are the guys that gave black people the ballot box. Those are the guys that, and so forth. So that's new Southern strategies to get these conservative, rural, angry white voters to vote Republican. Now, during the election, there's a bunch of shadiness happening that doesn't come out until after. It'll sound very similar to 2018. There is this committee to re-elect the president, also called a CREEP. Their job is to re-elect Nixon. And what happened, it's a long story, I'm not going to get into all of it because it doesn't matter, big picture. But what happens is they get caught breaking in to the Democratic National Committee Center, trying to steal campaign secrets from the Democrats. Now, President Nixon does not know about that part. There are a bunch of people that are close to Nixon know about that part, that they hired a bunch of crooks to break into the Democratic Convention Center and steal a bunch of their stuff. Nixon doesn't know about that, and the real thing that gets Nixon is not the crime, it's the cover-up. Nixon gets involved in helping pay these people to stay secret until the election. It's almost like they're porn stars. No, wait, that's this election. But they are paying these people to stay quiet for the election because they don't want it to come out, so they're going to lose the election. So Nixon gets involved in the cover-up. It's caught on tape because there's There's a recording system in the Oval Office of the White House. You guys got to hear it for LBJ's pants. The Senate investigates, and they find that he's guilty not of the crime, but of trying to cover it up. The White House is in disgrace. While all of this is happening, the Vice President, Spiro Agnew, also has to resign because he gets charged with evading his taxes. So the president's under investigation. The vice president resigns for tax evasion. And now the new vice president is Gerald Ford, who was previously the House of Representatives minority leader for Republicans. Did anybody vote for Gerald Ford to be president? No. And now he's vice president. Shortly after he gets appointed vice president, Nixon resigns. And now Gerald Ford is president, despite that nobody ever elected him into the executive office in the first place. All the other times we had a president die or get assassinated, at least we'd voted for their vice president. When Lincoln died, we'd voted for Johnson as the vice president. You guys with me? In this case, nobody voted for Ford, and Ford is now the president. Now this all gets revealed, all Watergate gets revealed because the two journalists, more muckrakers, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, they publish it through the Washington Post. And the three things he's charged with are obstruction of justice, abuse of presidential power, and contempt of Congress. He's charged with that, and rather than go through the impeachment trial like Andrew Johnson did, like Bill Clinton did, he realized, he looks at the evidence and he's like, you mean there's tapes? I'm on tape saying that? Yeah. I'm out. So he leaves the White House in disgrace, and this is his resignation. It's pretty fantastic.
Wow.
I'm out.